Hey guys, some point I don't think it's going to cut in yet.
Okay, no. All right, y'all. I think we are live. College football nerds. A lot of action to talk about today. Right now, obviously, Alabama barely leading A&M at the half. Lots of turnovers from the backup quarterback situation on both sides. I guess Haynes King is a backup quarterback now. Josh, in general, if you're an Alabama fan, you're probably a little bit frustrated because Alabama has all but dominated this game. But the 3 turnovers, really the 2 fumbles, are the difference in probably a 4-touchdown lead right now. Really, I think more than the turnovers is the fact that Jalen Milroe is not Bryce Young. And Bryce Young, if he's in this game, it's not a contest. Is that kind of where we're at right now?
I think so. So I'm looking at the box score right now. Alabama is out rushing Texas A&M 155-44. A&M has 100 yards passing, 11 of 23, less than 50%, and basically, probably 70 of that was on 2 passes. So, yeah, if you take away the one stat line, which is that Milroe 6 of 10 for 61 yards and 2 fumbles and a pick, and you replace that with anything relatively normal, Alabama's probably up 3 touchdowns at this point. But the spread at 24, even though it's a high spread, I think was taking all this into account, right? And even still, Alabama's up 3. They get the ball first, as Gary Danielson would make sure we all know. And if Alabama scores here and goes up 10, then this game can get out of hand in a minute. So I feel like this is a game that's on the knife's edge of being competitive or not. And it'll be interesting to see how it goes. A lot like I think we're seeing that a lot. A lot of games today have gone into the second quarter really tight, and then somewhere around the third quarter to early fourth quarter they've broken open. And I think this is another one of those. It's just we're still remains to be seen how that's actually going to turn out.
Yeah, and Parker Seymour says hold them to the same standard you hold Ohio State to. It's not the same standard, honestly, because C.J. Stroud didn't get hurt versus Notre Dame. Bryce Young in the game, because that's the quarterback you're going to face, right? You're going to face Bryce Young in a national championship setting. You're going to face Bryce Young in the SEC championship, something like that. Alabama's up 40 points probably right now. Like, that's maybe a little bit of hyperbole, but I think that all of the production or the closeness of this game has to do with a backup quarterback who is not the normal Alabama team. And Josh, I see a lot of people complaining about Bill O'Brien, but I think Bill O'Brien's called a pretty good game, if I'm being entirely honest. The mistakes that Jalen Milroe made were staying in the pocket too long, waiting too late to bail, and then fumbling with poor ball handling. When they switched to making it more of a pass first kind of offense in the second quarter, it opened those run lanes for Jalen Milroe. And we see what he's got to work with. So on this one so far, I'm not blaming Bill O'Brien at all. What about you?
No, I don't think Alabama's really done anything wrong. I think they probably haven't done enough easy stuff for Milroe, but that's I think that's nitpicking. At the end of the day, I think they've done a good enough job. They just got a big run. It's funny. Through I don't even know what that was in the first play of the second half. I've got that game up in the corner, and A&M drops an interception that doesn't really go near anybody, and then the next play is a big run play. I think something we've always said is if there's one time that we sort of make an excuse or that we make an adjustment for a team, it's that when a team either loses their starting quarterback during a game or loses their starting quarterback for a game. That is probably, in this sport, the single most excusable thing for a bad performance. And a loss is a loss, and if they lose this game, then we'll certainly ding them in our rankings. But in terms of a poor performance, that really is the one time, and I think we've been consistent with that for years, that we're not going to really have a major reaction to. It's just kind of the one thing in college football that, backup quarterbacks almost never play well when they come in immediately, barring some strange circumstances.
And people are saying QB shouldn't matter because A&M is terrible. Like, look, A&M, yeah, they lost to App State. They also beat Arkansas. A&M didn't give up a ton of points to App State. A&M's defense is not terrible. That's not the problem. And 14 of A&M's points came off of turnovers that their defense created. So I think it's a little bit unserious to say that, okay, and we see this massive drop off. Jalen Milroe is not a good QB, at least the way he's playing tonight. So to say, hey, this team that's got a ton of 5-star players and a good defense, because you got your quarterback out and you're playing with a guy that's probably a running back playing quarterback, you've got no excuse. I think that's a little ridiculous. And I think there's maybe 3 or 4 teams in the country that wouldn't have the fall off as he throws a touchdown pass here. But I think that's a little ridiculous. It's his first start ever. He's not a great quarterback as we've seen so far, and it's against Texas A&M. I think that's a little unserious. And also the Ohio State fans, Josh, that are killing us about this. Like, we've got Ohio State number 1 in our poll. So what standard are we judging them compared to Ohio State? I don't know what they want.
I don't know. It's funny to me when people are like, well, you need to hold them to the same standard you held us to. And the standard that we have you number 1, we both have you number 1 in our poll and have for weeks. Like, are we supposed to like drop them further away from Ohio State? I don't get it. I mean, we dropped Ohio State some week 1. I think it couldn't have been any further than 4. Probably more like 3.
I dropped him to 3.
And that was one game. And that was one game against a Notre Dame team, which I also have up here, for monetization reasons, not where you can see. And, that's a bad Notre Dame team. So, yeah, when that was your only sample size. Same way we dropped Alabama when they struggled with Texas. And actually, that gets me to a super chat. So, someone, Josh Nader, who's always mixing up in the comments. And by the way, I hope you guys, sometimes we've been getting a little hostile in the comments, I think. Let's try to be a little more engaged and a little less hostile this week. I may even try to monitor it some. I'll keep me distracted. But he was saying if viewers stayed healthy all season, is Texas a top 3 team? I mean, the answer to that, I think,
Good
is
question.
It depends on what you think would have actually happened in the Alabama game. And that's probably one of the most controversial things you can raise. I know both of us have a very similar opinion, which is never judge a team by their scripted drives. That is a consistent thing with me anytime I'm evaluating any football team. Ewer's injury coincided with the end of Texas's scripted drives and Alabama making a change to corner to Terrion Arnold, who's been playing actually really well in this game against Texas A&M in particular. He's the guy that had that interception. And yeah, I mean, they gave up a score, they gave up one score really on that drive where Ewers got injured, and that was a deep pass to the guy that's now been benched. And the roughing the passer call really turned that into everything you want to say about them probably hinges on the fact that they beat Texas Tech, I think, with Ewers. That's accurate. Yeah. Do they beat Alabama? I think they'd be a top 10 team probably with Ewers being healthy. I don't know that I beat out. Like, they're and once you start scoring, then Alabama would have to respond. They're going to play that game differently. Like, it's so far out in the woods to get hypothetical on that one, but I will at least say they would have beaten Texas Tech, and they would have been probably at least a top 15 team, if not a top.
But let's tease that out into the year. Like, I think that if we look at the Big 12 this year, and man, I was watching that broadcast, and McElroy said this is the deepest the Big 12 has ever been, and I kind of lost it a little bit because that's insane to me. The Big 12 has been a very good conference lately, and their bell cow right now almost lost to Texas Tech at home tonight. So with no Oklahoma, like Oklahoma's bad this year. I think that if you tease this out to the end of the year, Texas with Ewers and that defense playing pretty good has the chance to be a 12-1 team going to the playoffs, and then they're kind of a top 3 team. I think they still have a knucklehead game left in them. But to me, with Ewers or with a healthy Hudson Card, that's the team to me that is the front runner in the Big 12 right now, ahead of even the Oklahoma State with the clean record. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing we just saw, right, Texas Tech took Oklahoma State to the wire. I mean, I said this a week or two ago that I felt like Texas Tech was actually a sneakily good team, and then they've just been sort of inconsistent themselves. But maybe if they were a little healthier, they might well have beaten Oklahoma State today. So, yeah, it's tough, but I do think Texas is probably the best team in the Big 12. And let's take one step back, okay? And let's admit one thing. TCU demolished Oklahoma last week, right? I don't want to overreact too much to Texas destroying Oklahoma without Gabriel the entire game. When we saw what Oklahoma looked like last week, I think Oklahoma is just an objectively bad team too. The thing with me is that I think Texas is at least as good as TCU, and I think their ceiling with Ewers is only going to be higher and higher. Now, we saw some things even in that game where Ewers made some really just absolutely head-scratching decisions. Yes. He has all the arm talent in the world, and guys like that look fantastic when they're playing a team that is leaving you with guys wide open or with easy regular throws to your main read. Even if the guy's not that open, he's open when you look at your main read. Ewers may look like a bit of a different quarterback when they have to get out of their script against a better defense that doesn't give him his first opportunity and actually get some pressure and all those sorts of things. I don't know. I mean, I'm saying that from sort of the purely hypothetical angle, but I'm just saying that there's a lot of unknowns there in the Big 12, but they certainly are as well positioned as anyone.
I just got to comment on this because I saw it coming on the wire, and I laughed about to a friend of mine yesterday. Took a 7-team parlay. Zach Hay says he covered Georgia, Tennessee, Vandy, Mississippi State, but lost his parlay because of the Florida Missouri game. And I'm using a little nicer language, so we stay monetized. I had a buddy had a 17 parlay that hit 6 of 7 and missed App State, who I think I haven't seen. I think they were getting blown out by Texas State the last time I looked. So there was a comment earlier, and I want to try to find it, but if Milroe starts next week for Alabama, do we beat Tennessee? I don't think we do, says Guthrie Leith. Thank you for the super chat. So here's one thing, Josh, that I think is interesting. And no, I don't think you do. But to me, Jalen Milroe is a little bit like Anthony Richardson playing quarterback. Anthony Richardson has had one good game this year. And it was against Tennessee. I think Tennessee scored some points on Alabama. I also think that LSU gave them a lot today. Obviously, I'm high on Tennessee. I had them number 4 last week, and people called me silly. Not so silly now. But Josh, talk a little bit about that. If Bryce Young can't go next week, I honestly think they were just saving him for next week. But let me know what you think about that. If Alabama has to play Jalen Milroe next week on the road at Tennessee, do they have a prayer?
With all the hate on Texas A&M's defense is substantially better than Tennessee's. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit of a different calculation. I picked LSU to beat Tennessee. I was wrong. Wasn't just wrong, was wrong by a lot. But that was a weird thing. That game really got off the rails immediately because LSU's starting left tackle was hospitalized last night, and then they lose their starting left guard midway through the first quarter. They got a true freshman at left tackle, and then they ended up having a backup at left guard, and it unraveled. I think the expectation from Vegas, who didn't have that as a blowout at all, they had a very close game, was that Tennessee's defense was so poor that LSU was going to be able to get some rhythm and move the ball. And the reality of that was a game, one of those games where you see O-line meltdown mode.
Mm-hmm.
When an offensive line is just given free rushers it was about every 4th play, it is impossible to move the ball because LSU would start to move it and they would take a sack for 8 yards.
An injury-related O-line meltdown mode, right?
Yeah. So that was not a predictable thing. And I say that just to point out, look, I don't necessarily assume that Alabama can't run the ball every play and score some on Tennessee. Now, I think they would struggle a little bit defensively because of Tennessee's offense, but Alabama's defense is also light years ahead of LSU. This actually gets me to one of the bigger talking points that I personally think is just wrong nationally, and that's that people keep talking about the LSU secondary. Guys, LSU secondary is not good. It's not good. They weren't good last year. McGlothern is gone. Ricks is gone. That is not the same unit as it was, and they've got some guys that are decent, but
banged up.
Yeah, yep. They're pretty banged up. But Sage Ryan was a 5-star safety they have there, and they didn't really want to play him, and now he's playing meaningful minutes and nickel and dime, and he's a serious liability in coverage, as it turns out. He really ought to be an oversized or undersized linebacker, the way he seems to be playing, and they've got no choice but to play him. There's a lot of problems with LSU defensively, and I think it's all sort of rearing its ugly head. Let me try to. There's a bunch of super chats, guys, and we got
a bunch.
Like, I think there's like 8 pending, and we always try to get to your super chats. There's going to probably be times we can't, just because sometimes there's so many we can't get to them. But we do try to get to them. So let's knock out the Alabama A&M ones first, since we were just discussing it. Someone, and this is sort of related, right? Said, as we found out that Arkansas, it really isn't a good team today. They're a 500 team. So
without their quarterback, without KJ Jefferson, let's start with that, because he makes that offense go.
Right. He said, and anytime Saban has had QB issues, he could always just run the ball. Now he can't, ? So it's more of a team issue if Bama can't run. I think they got to be closing on 200 yards rushing at the start of the third quarter. I don't think they cannot run. A lot of it's come from Milroe, but they've run the ball pretty well. And again, Arkansas has an objectively bad defense. We knew that was the case. We talked about that a lot in our Alabama-Arkansas preview, which is why we thought Alabama would win that game 50-something to 10. I think they would have if Bryce Young had been healthy. But KJ Jefferson, I'm not saying he's the best player in the conference. I think he's probably the most valuable player in the Southeastern Conference. There are some really good players. Bryce Young is one of them. Alabama can probably win this game with Jalen Milroe. Arkansas ain't going to win a lot of games without KJ Jefferson.
Right.
And defensively, they really have a problem, because Drew Sanders, the Alabama transfer who was leading the country in sacks, is a converted edge rusher at inside linebacker. And to this point, they've been constantly sort of walking him up and trying to, use him as a disruptive runner or a disruptive edge rusher. There's some question whether there's a fumble. That is not at all a fumble. I'm watching it live right now. So that game's going to stall for a bit. And against Mississippi State, who regularly goes 5 wide, they have to drop all their linebackers into coverage. And that meant they really only had a 3-man line, and they just got horribly exposed. Arkansas is a limited team defensively with a bad secondary. Their one strength is that they have some pretty active linebackers, but those linebackers are great playing downhill. They are not good playing laterally. And then so that there was kind of a perfect storm between that and the fact that they didn't have a quarterback that could sustain drives. So that's sort of my takeaway from Arkansas. I think Mississippi State is a good team. Remember, LSU blew out Mississippi State. So it's going to go back and forth, all season, right?
Yeah, I mean, LSU blew them out in the sense that Mississippi State had the lead in the fourth quarter and just got gassed because they couldn't catch a pass. Mike Farino said, "How's it going tonight?" And I'll tell you how it's going. It is going Russell's single barrel good. Apparently, you gotta get past the first 30 seconds with foul language or any other things to not get demonetized. It's really hard to get this anywhere. And I found it on the shelf at retail price this week. And I also got the 10-year and the 6-year because I love it. And it's so hard to get anything on the shelf. Just want to put that out there. Josh, let's do another super chat. Benjamin V said, "Did you take anything away from the Michigan game? Glad to hear Mike Hart is okay. That was a scary scene." For those that didn't see the game, Mike Hart collapsed, I think, on the sideline, had to get stretchered off the field. It was really scary. And not only was it scary, and this is why I don't take too much from that Michigan game that was kind of ugly for 2 quarters during that. The players on the sideline were reasonably shook. They were upset. They were having to get hugs by other coaches and getting calmed down. Mike Hart's kind of a heart and soul of a lot of that team. And that was a crazy situation. No, I don't take too much from it. I mean, a lot of people expected Michigan to win that game by 40 or whatever. I don't take too much from that game, given that situation and the fact that they eventually handled their business. Josh, did you take anything from that game?
Not really. I mean, they were playing a rather outmatched opponent, which was kind of expected. And when they got going, they got going. And sometimes you play games like that, and frankly, this is the way a lot of games have gone tonight, where teams just play really not bend but don't break, but just hold until they score defense. And that's what Michigan was facing. And at some point, those dams start to break. And that's, I think, a little bit what happened in that Michigan game. But the combination of factors didn't really bother me. Michigan handled their business. They won the game. wasn't like that was a last second score away from winning, right? I'm trying to remember 31-10. Yeah, 3 touchdowns.
Yeah. It was
I
close
got
for 3 quarters, I think, and they pulled away late, but still, yeah.
Yep. Another one. So knocking off the Bama thing for a while here. Watching Bama versus A&M, both QBs need to be jumped in a dark alleyway by their own teammates. That's a little harsh.
Yeah.
I think everybody hopefully is supportive of backup quarterbacks in those situations. So Texas A&M is a weird situation because he was the starter that became the backup, that became the starter again. But it is what it is. Okay, so what's the next thing I want to move on to? Lamar said Tennessee's uniform was ugly. Lamar is a LSU fan. If you didn't
But
guess
he's
from
not
that
wrong.
remark.
So people are going to say you're an LSU fan. You got a jaundiced view because Tennessee beat y'all today. But he's not wrong. That orange, that color, that shade of orange is not great. In a way that like Florida orange looks good, Auburn orange looks good. Tennessee uniforms, I don't love them, so I don't think he's wrong.
Yep. Ohio State, Sam
Shadiger.
Shadiger?
I'll say
Okay.
Shadiger.
I'm going to say Shea Digger, but we're probably both wrong. Said you guys were right about Marvin Harrison Jr. He's a dude. I mean, there's one catch he made in the pylon where the guy was in great coverage, and he just
that
went,
was awesome.
Nope. Just right over the back on a back shoulder. Really wasn't well thrown. He's a dude. And they've got a lot of good receivers at Ohio State. I think Michigan State makes your receivers look a little better than they are. But as we said, you can glean something from games where you're really outmatching the opponent.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to like a couple plays like Fleming or Egbuka just like took a play on a wide, crossing route or something where they're open by 15 yards. Okay, yeah, he's a good receiver, but a lot of receivers would do well in that situation.
But that touchdown was covered. That touchdown
Right.
was the one time they've played pass defense this year, and he still took it from him and scored.
Yeah, that's saying something. So Ohio State has a lot of weapons, and yeah, they just kind of keep going. Did you have any real takeaways from that game? It's hard for me in those because you knew Michigan State is not a good football team. You knew they were overmatched. I was a little surprised that Michigan State did move the ball some at points in the game, but
yeah,
I mean it's a P5 team. They're going to do that, so it didn't really shock me.
Their first score was a pick six, so that to me, and it was just a bad read. I'm not blaming anything on the quarterback there. In general, I didn't take much from that other than the fact that if Ohio State wanted to score 100.
Yeah, I mean it. I don't think there's any. Somebody said best wide receiver room in the country. Is there a debate? I'm actually serious. Is there anyone else that's really
even without JSN, right?
I mean, is there anybody else that's even going to claim that? I don't think Georgia fans are going to claim it. They'll claim to have the best tight end room in the country, but they're not going to claim to have the best receiving core. Alabama fans certainly aren't going to claim it, and I don't really know who else is going to step up there. So yeah, I mean, I think it's Ohio State by a landslide in that regard, right? And I will say, in recent years with the RPO, having the best receiving core has been sort of the key advantage in college football. So that's a big deal for sure.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a lot. How and I got roasted for it, but I'm stand by it. Returning corners or really secondary, but especially corners and wide receivers are a bigger indicator of how well you're going to do, far more than offensive line production returning. Especially like you said, RPO, because what people maybe don't realize in the RPO era, there's a lot of stuff that the wide receivers have to do that's put on them that in normal maybe pro style offenses is not, and I think that's part of it. But I also think that you're dealing with not just RPO but also zone read era, where you're dealing with players in space having to do things with the ball. And I think that yeah, Ohio State's wide receiver room, even without JSN, is the best in the country.
And I think one of the big things that RPO has done is because it's so predicated on getting one-on-one matchups and sort of, especially slot players. If you have a speed advantage, I think it's a really significant advantage. And I think that's one area where Ohio State is really good, but maybe doesn't have as much of an edge as they might like compared to some teams previously. But certainly, if you've got guys that can win their one-on-one matchups, it's just a big, big advantage to your team and your offense. And Alabama fumbled the ball again in the quarterback screen. This is
Four
crazy.
turnovers. That's wild. 4 turnovers so far, and they're going to win this game. But this is crazy. I mean, this time it wasn't Jalen Milroe; it was a running back. And they were moving the ball. But wow, it's insane.
Yeah, so right now I've got the BYU Notre Dame game, the Bama game, and then the Florida State NC State game. So you guys know. So if there's one that I really need to flip to, let us know. And I said that to segue a little bit here to at least one super chat and probably another point you'll want to talk about. Mike Farino says, looking like Notre Dame is going to be closer to the team we thought they'd be than the team that lost to Marshall. He also said, Marvin Harrison is the first Ohio State wide receiver to have three touchdown games in his career. He started 7 games. Well, that part I think we've covered, but the Notre Dame part with them up right now, 28-20. So not quite put away, but 2 minutes, 50 seconds left. Number 16 BYU up a touchdown with the ball. What are your thoughts on that? I've got thoughts, but I'm gonna let you go first.
Man, I don't have thoughts because like every time I have a thought on Notre Dame, Ohio State fans get at me. So what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are I think Notre Dame is playing better football. I think BYU has a bad defense. We kind of thought they did coming in. And man, I keep coming back to something I tweeted about a while back, which is what happens when you take the Baylor BYU result as a fluke? Because there's like Washington State and BYU and Wisconsin and a bunch of other teams that are sort of in this big mesh.
Also, what if Baylor sucks?
Yeah. And if you can accept that was either a fluke and or that Baylor's not a very good football team, suddenly, you can we've been taking heat all year on Twitter from BYU fans for not having them ranked higher and for not showing them more love. I'm not sure that BYU is a great football team, is the truth of the matter. And I think they're better than Marshall, but Notre Dame shouldn't have lost to Marshall. They're not that bad. I think this game is just maybe more of a reflection of Notre Dame is still not the team that people thought they would be, but also BYU is not nearly the team that people think they are right now, ranked 16th.
So what's interesting to me, and I said this is going to happen last week, I said Arkansas, obviously with their quarterback out, I thought they were going to lose to Mississippi State. I think Arkansas beats BYU this week. And BYU is going to be a top 25 team. Even if they lose to Notre Dame, they're probably still going to be ranked. And I think that Arkansas with KJ Jefferson is better than BYU. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think if KJ Jefferson, is in the game. And again, he's in concussion protocol, right? So if I remember right. And then the key thing there is a guy in concussion protocol. You don't really expect to come out of that limited. So, no, I agree with you. And BYU, just to run through their schedule, they blew out South Florida, who's an objectively bad team, 50-21. They beat Baylor close, 26-20, and there's questions on Baylor. They were blown out by Oregon, 41-20, and I still think we overreacted to Oregon based off that result, but that's a different story. 2-touchdown win over Wyoming. And then a 12-point, very long, close game to Utah State. I personally don't think BYU is really a top 25 quality team. I don't care what the metrics say or anything else. And their schedule, look, they play Arkansas, which is going to be a big test for them and really sort of a metric after this Notre Dame game, assuming Notre Dame holds on to win. But if they lose to Oregon, Arkansas, and Notre Dame, I mean, they could reasonably be like the 35th best team in the country and go 9-3 with the schedule.
Right. Well, the Utah State one is key to me because they were losing in the fourth quarter to a team that lost 35-7 to Wagner. And I'm not doing transitive property that much, but like I saw Utah State play UConn. I saw Utah State play Alabama. They had no business trailing Utah State in the fourth quarter. And yes, Utah State went with a different quarterback, which was a big deal given that other guy had been there for like 5 years. But Notre Dame fan, obviously not biased at all, said LOL, BYU is worse than Arkansas. If KJ Jefferson is healthy, Arkansas will beat BYU next week on the road. They will do it. We got to get to some more super chats.
We'll probably do a preview of that one. I'm going to reserve judgment a little bit because I do think BYU's offense is pretty good and Arkansas's defense is bad. But yeah, let's run through some super chats.
Isaac says, "Are you giving Notre Dame a shot at beating Clemson?" I think it's a 50-50 game. I haven't seen the score in the last little bit since we started.
24-3 Boston College.
So it was
24-3
like 10,
Clemson over. Yeah,
10-3 at the half. Boston College is one of the worst Power 5 teams in the country. But look, I think Notre Dame maybe needs to find something a little more at quarterback before I can pick them to beat Clemson. But I think Clemson's shown enough warts this year that I don't think it's out of the question.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I mean, even early in this game with Boston College, Boston College is a very beat up team. They don't have any depth. They're a bad team to start with, and it took Clemson a long time to pull away. Anybody that's reasonably good is going to have a shot. I mean, Wake Forest had a good shot to beat Clemson, and I think Notre Dame's going to be the same place. There's a lot of things that can happen when you play a team that has a really, really good defense and maybe not a great offense, that the scores are going to stay low. So if they give up some cheap scores or whatever, anybody's going to have a shot. And I certainly think Notre Dame's defense is good enough to make Clemson have a lot of fits trying to score the ball. And so, yeah.
Stephen Light said, just relaxing, hoping the same Michigan team shows up next week for Penn State. I mean, if I were picking that game today, I feel like it's kind of a pick 'em, Josh. And I do think that Michigan has maybe shown a little bit more on offense, but also they haven't played anybody. And so I'm really struggling to know how to handicap a Michigan team. I don't think that, like, if I'm a Penn State fan right now, I don't think that I need a miracle to beat Michigan. Do you?
No, no, I tend to agree with that. It really feels like it's almost a 2-game schedule with Penn State and Ohio State, and that's not shocking because again they didn't play a Power 5 out of conference. So, and there are reasons for that, right? It was UCLA that backed out on them, I believe. But yeah, I mean I don't think it doesn't really feel like we're going to know who they are until they play this game against Penn State, and even then we still really won't know who they are until they play again against Ohio State. Either way. And this is it has killed me a little bit. People talk about the depth of the Big 10 and the Big 12, and I'm sorry, but I don't know that it's true, right? Rutgers, Nebraska, Illinois, Indiana are bad teams. Iowa is at least can play with people because of their defense, but they're a really limited football team. There's about half the Big 10. Michigan State is a terrible football team. There's about half the Big 10 or more that's just not competitive. And Michigan kind of lucked out this year with their schedule that they have those teams. I mean, granted, if you switch it over and you get Wisconsin, it's not like it's any harder. Northwestern, it's a very top-heavy conference in truth, and it does make evaluating them hard. I'm not saying Michigan's a bad team. We both have had them in our top 5. Probably will still have them in our top 5 tonight. But it does make evaluating them difficult. Penn State's in the same boat.
And Penn State's got a tricky next 3 games. So 2 out of their next 3 are, Michigan and Ohio State. So it's also tough to evaluate a team that has to play those 2 in a 3-game stretch. But, and this is kind of a weird segue, but to me, if I'm being entirely honest, Josh, and I don't want to upset the Georgia fans that might be watching us right now, but I think Penn State played Auburn on the road better than Georgia played them at home today. And look, that score was great. Like, it was a clean score, but I didn't love the Georgia performance today if I'm looking at them with a chance to beat an Alabama or Ohio State.
And let me make a big caveat there. Penn State actually had to pay TJ Finley for, a half?
Yeah.
Right? So, no, I tend to agree with that. I mean, once Ashford went in, Penn State shut them down completely. Now, he came in cold, which is tough. But when TJ Finley was in the game, yeah, they moved the ball a little bit, but it's not a fair comparison, I don't think. So yeah, it's tough, man. It's tough. All right, you want to hit some more super chats here?
Yeah, I think it's it's funny because we've been talking through super chats and we've still got 4 or 5 to go. Casey Knox, and this is back to the very beginning of our discussion where Parker Seymour, who's just desperate for us to just absolutely trash an Alabama team that's probably, when healthy, the best team in the country. He was trashing us early, but Casey Knox said, "You've been fair in your top tens and previews. Ignore these Ohio State fans. They don't speak for all of us. Keep up the great work." For the record, I do still love me some Parker Seymour. I want to put that out there. He can give us hell all he wants. Shows up every week. Still love him. But Casey, thank you for the super chat. Josh, I'll let you take this one. Killtack9 says, just stopping by to say this will be my last weekend. Bama is going to be the death of me. And I imagine that happened maybe right after the fourth turnover they had tonight. But maybe you can tackle that one for a minute.
I think it's the height of a envious position to be in, right? Where you're in a game where you're leading by 1 to 2 scores, and you feel like, oh gosh, this is the end of times. We might drop a game this year. Yeah, I mean, Alabama still has their issues. I continue to think. I'm going to say spoiler. I continue to think Ohio State is the more complete team right now. Alabama just hasn't quite managed to get to their ceiling, but I think their ceiling is on up there. And Alabama's defense,
I think
quietly,
I'll interrupt you a
scary.
little bit. Yeah, I think Alabama's defense is as good as Ohio State's offense. I'll just put that out there.
They've given up some plays, but again, anytime you're like -3, -4 in the turnover margin, and teams have that many opportunities to just take shots, it's hard not to give up plays. So, yeah, and I mean, again, here Alabama's driving on the field and they take a stupid sack, pushing them to the edge of field goal range.
I will say, I don't know that.
And wow, they got the crosser wide open too. He doesn't even see him. They bring in inside blitz, and they've got
open
the slot receiver
late.
running across.
I don't blame him for that. He was open late. That crosser was open late, but they covered his immediate hot read pretty well, which is the first time I've seen that tonight. So I'm not blaming him for that one. I'm not blaming Jalen Milroe for that one. And Alabama just missed a field goal. So Mike Farino said, to be clear, wasn't saying Notre Dame is great. I thought they were probably about the 20th best team coming into the year. Last couple of weeks, they're back to looking like that. I can buy Notre Dame as the 20th best team, especially given how they handled North Carolina, though I think North Carolina's defense is, what do they give at 61 to App State? Miami scored on them some tonight. I can buy Notre Dame as the 20th best team. As the 5th best team, which in week 6, Ohio State fans are still wanting to claim an 11-point win over the 5th best team. I don't buy them as that, but I'll give you 20th.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's the reality. If you want to say it's a rank win, I'm fine with it. If you want to talk about it being a top 5 or top 10 win, it's a very different conversation. And that's, yeah, everything's relative, everything's subjective, and that's just sort of the realities of it. And I'm keeping, man, Texas A&M is driving down the field. I feel like this is going to be another one of those live shows we did, like where Alabama got knocked off last time. Not in an enviable position, but Alabama just cannot put this game away.
Yeah, they've had a couple of chances now with drives, and then they had the turnover to really get up to a point that it's like 2 scores or even 17 points that would put their offense in a position to have to throw it every play, and they haven't been able to. Michael Barmer says, petition to release all polls after week 6. How different do you think they would be if we waited till the midpoint? Love the show, fellas. # Buckeyes. So for me, I like preseason polls. I like early season polls. The problem is the AP and the coaches polls don't do what we do, and that's wildly adjust week to week based on new data. And we let new data influence us a lot more than our priors, or a lot more than what we had in our preseason poll. We're not embarrassed to say, hey, we got it wrong. That team didn't belong in the top 10. So we're not trying to justify them staying there. So I don't mind early season polls if people are willing to adjust heavily in week 1, 2, 3, whatever, all the way down to the end of the year.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I mean, the reality is you're always going to have polls because the media is always going to rank teams regardless of whether, the playoff does or not. The AP poll isn't connected to the playoff or the championship anymore. They do it because they want to do it. So it's a little little bit of an empty hypothetical. But I do certainly think the problem is more that people rank their teams 1 through 25, and then they just look at who win and lost and they adjust it. And frankly, I think it's a laziness thing from most of the sports writers. A lot of them don't really follow college football. They're just general sports writers. Whatever. I look who wins or loses. Let me go look and see how the Lions did last night. And so that is just sort of is what it is. I'm going to take a moment for Stephen Light super chat here that Daniel's been avoiding acknowledging. Can't believe you're just letting that star appearance on Pate State go mention. So yes, we were live on Josh Pate's show on Thursday, and by we I mean Daniel. And I thought he did a very good job. I think everybody's at home giving you a little bit of round of applause, Daniel. Guys, it's nerve-wracking to try to get up and speak in front of a crowd like that. To do it live on a channel and a show you're not used to. Pate threw you a little bit of a curveball off the jump there, I think. But you handled it with aplomb, man. So good job. I think you did a great job. I told you that at the time, and I think everybody else probably thinks you did too.
Yeah, that was tough. I've never done anything like that where there's like a crowd behind me and there's drunk chicks screaming death to Louisville. And for me, it was interesting because I told Pate when we got started, I said, when I screw up at home, I can just hit delete. And the only person that's mocking me is Josh, Nerd Josh in the background, in my monitor or whatever, laughing about how I can't get an open right. You can't do that when you're live. And the thing is, it's so different from our live show where it's still just me and the camera and maybe a kid in diapers that'll walk in every once in a while. It's like you've got producers and people doing audio and mic checks ahead of time. And then Josh Pate's in his ear talking to people in the CBS studio in Fort Lauderdale. And yes, producer Jesse is real. He was talking to him before the kickoff. So yeah, it's a different animal than what we do. And yeah, I sent him a bunch of things that I thought we could talk about. And off the jump, after he introduced me, he asked me a question that I hadn't even really thought about yet. So that was fun. But yeah, Stephen Light said, is there a law that all the co-eds in bars at Bama are blind? And I'll give y'all a little bit of insight there. At first, it was just the guys. And Pate made sure that there was a little bit of eye candy there right behind him. And I think it was a good call. But I will say the one thing, and if anybody's listening, the one thing that really calmed me was all the people before the show coming up to me and talking to me and saying, hey, I recognize you. I listened to your, preview this morning. That helped me a ton. Knowing that there are people out there that hear us all the time, I can't tell you how much it kind of brought me down from that. So it was a lot of fun, though. I'd love to do it again.
Yeah, no, and honestly, guys, it's fun for us to interact with people and to do these live shows. It's hard to do. It's hard. We're talking about as many games as we can. It's hard to follow that many. I can watch. You can only really meaningfully watch about 2 at a time. I'll usually have more like 4 or 5 going at once, but you can't really watch the 3rd, 4th, and 5th one to a meaningful degree. So yeah, let me take a break to say South Carolina just knocked off ranked Kentucky. That is a low-key upset that's kind of stunning almost. I mean, Kentucky's not been playing well. Levis
didn't play. Levis didn't play tonight. That's important.
But South Carolina has been bad. Like, bad, y'all. So, yeah, on the road, 24-14 over Kentucky, it really feels like the SEC East, like Missouri. We keep assuming some teams are the bottom. I would have assumed it was South Carolina and Missouri by a landslide, or maybe Vandy. Vandy showed up today for most of the game. I mean, the depth gave out against Ole Miss, but they showed up for a while and fought hard. And those South Carolina now jumping Kentucky. Kentucky moves down, but Kentucky beat Florida. Like, is Florida the bottom? It's a churn. And this gets me to a point that I wanted to make about college football. And we haven't really discussed this, Daniel, but I think at some level we need to accept that college football is just not that predictable this year. And I think I have my own theory on it. I think there's been some shifts in the way football's played and some shifts about things that work that have changed it. And so that it's really twofold. One, on our side, we need to be a little less surprised when these results happen and be a little less inclined to say, what do we have wrong? Because these teams are blowing each other out in alternating fashion, in like round robin fashion. And it's clear that teams are just not playing consistently. And two, I wonder the effect this has on modeling. And I haven't seen anybody really cop to this. And maybe we want to note it a little bit on our end, but it probably is going to have an effect on the accuracy. The modeling has too.
Yeah, and me and Pay for a while this show the other night, in that you don't have that second tier, and Stephen Light will get upset, but you don't have that second tier of teams that are like almost elite but not quite, that just handle their business against everybody that's mediocre, can't quite beat Alabama or Ohio State, but they're really good. They're quality New York Six type teams. We don't have that, which throws all the modeling off, because you don't have the games to compare based on their data. When your fourth best team in the country barely beats Florida, or your top 10 team in the country wins 17-7 over Northwestern, yes, in a monsoon or whatever, those things have a cascading effect on what we can know about the teams that aren't quite as good. And the fact that, like, Josh, do you have any confidence predicting the 10th best team versus the 35th best team? I don't.
No. I mean, that's what we're saying, like Notre Dame and BYU. And this is part of the conversation probably, that I was kind of bashing them to an extent, but I was bashing them to the extent that people seem to say, why aren't they in our top 10 right now? Well, you can also say, well, why aren't they in your top 10? Right? Like Notre Dame, everybody else, it's just this giant mash of teams that are all sort of relatively equal or similar. And yeah, I mean, how do you rank them? How do you consider them? Michael Ballmer just said, honest assessment of USC playoff team. And to me, that's an example. Like I pulled up, like they're putting away Washington State, right?
Struggled for 3 quarters.
Right. Washington State beat Idaho by 7. They beat Wisconsin, who we now know to be a terrible team, by 3. Lost to Oregon close, which is still, we don't quite, that's what I'm saying. That's in that group of us not knowing how to read them. And then for their part with USC, I mean, you look at the rest of their games they've played. They blew out Rice, which is not really notable. Stanford, they beat handily, not that notable. Fresno State, they're really bad this year. Oregon State was very close. Arizona State was a big win, not meaningful. They're going to play Utah. They're going to play UCLA. They're going to play Notre Dame. We're going to learn something from those 3 games, but I think it's going to take all 3. And I'll be honest, because of the stupid Pac-12 After Dark and the fact we do this show, I don't follow the Pac-12 teams as close as I do other conferences. I'm going to own it. I can't. I try to go back and rewatch video. It's really stinking hard, y'all. But I do think I can safely say that the Pac-12 teams just aren't, they ain't it this year. And because of the group that USC's played, man, like I've gone back and watched clips from them, and I kind of throw my hands up and go, yeah, they made highlight plays and they did pretty well, but they did pretty well against a team that a lot of people do pretty well on. And when you start playing the RU top 10 game, it gets pretty difficult to make those sorts of judgment calls.
Yeah, and somebody said in the chat that UCLA is going to win the Pac-12. They beat a team that Florida beat tonight. And it's tough for me because, my goodness, and this is what we talk about all the time, the connective tissue of data that we need with out of conference Power 5 games is what helps us learn so much about everything else. Michigan canceled a series with UCLA this year. They wanted a guaranteed win, an 8th home game. So they canceled the series and picked up UConn, who's trash, garbage team, even though I think they won today. If UCLA played Michigan, that gives us so much information about the rest of the Pac-12 and all the Big Ten. And it's just really frustrating because now USC might be a playoff team because they have a clean record in a bad league. That doesn't tell us, like, are they a playoff team on the level of actually being there? Like, I think 2016 Washington belonged in the playoffs, even though it was like a 24-10 type of game against Alabama. I think that USC very well might be 2019 Oklahoma.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just tough. Like you look at Utah's schedule, lose to Florida, beat SUU, beat San Diego State, beat Arizona State, beat Oregon State, lost to UCLA. What's their best win? Is it Oregon State? Is it Arizona State? Does that matter? I mean, how do you? Like you said, the connective tissue is just shot in those conferences, and it's tough to evaluate it. And look, it doesn't really matter because I think it'll sort itself out by the end of the year. But that is just sort of the nature of where we're at.
Did A&M just have an illegal substitution after they forced a punt? That's
Yes.
painful. Oh, that's
yes, they did.
That is super painful. And that's the thing that
those plays are the equivalent of a fumble, right?
Yeah,
like that.
It's a turnover.
That penalty is effectively a fumble. Those things are just brutal, even though it doesn't show up in any of the stat sheets. It's brutal.
Parker showing his maybe his his bias in all caps said Bama just got bailed out. WTF? They didn't get bailed out. They didn't get bailed out by the rest. Maybe they got bailed out by A&M. But an illegal substitution is not hard to call. It's not a judgment call. So, Josh, tell me this, and I think that we've been really tough on Michigan this year about canceling that series. And somebody said in the chat that no, it was UCLA that canceled it. They did not. There are like Michigan outlets that have admitted that Michigan canceled the series.
Okay, so I said that earlier because I thought they'd canceled it. So that's not true.
Michigan canceled the series, not UCLA. It was a Michigan cancellation, and I posted an article because a Michigan fan got at me on Twitter. It was like the first time anybody has said something and admitted they were wrong in Twitter. They got at me on Twitter, and then I posted an MLive article that was like Michigan canceled. And look, like they're looking out for their best interest. I get it. But having said all that, they can still be good even though they didn't play anybody out of conference, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it doesn't mean you're bad. It just means it's hard to evaluate. We've still had them like a top 5 team through most of the year, and I think we're going to continue to do that. I think it's the biggest thing I will say is I think it's really to their disadvantage long term, because what we generally see with teams that are in that situation is it's really difficult to just wake up and play really good football at the end of the year. We've seen Clemson do it a couple times, but I think it's a little different with a team that's got a high-level quarterback and an offense that can get humming. You can kind of get humming against bad competition, I think, offensively. Defensively, it's hard. Defense is about motion. It's about reaction, about contact. And it's the same reason that really high-power offenses often struggle defensively, or so I've been told, or in the theory that I've held. They like to have clean reps. They like their offense to work well. Their offense is moving the ball. It's scoring in practice. And now you get into a real game, and that defense that hasn't had a lot of opportunities to meet somebody in the hole and stuff them, they don't know how to do it. And that could be the problem for Michigan, like it has been in the past at times when they play Ohio State at the end of the year. And I'm not really making a projection on that one way or the other because we're going to learn a lot more about both those teams, especially when they play Penn State and some other teams. But it is definitely something to sort of keep an eye on. I know I'll buy Daniel some time. I can see in our little chat that he's
I'm
working away, trying to come up with his top 10. Yeah. Let me go through the outdated super chats here. I know that Texas A&M had a good D-line, but I'm surprised how much pressure they've been able to generate without complete blitzes. Alabama's quarterback play is not really great right now. And there was one a second ago where he threw the ball out of bounds. He's got both of his main reads open deep over the middle, and they're bringing pressure or keeping spies down, and he's just not seeing it. The other thing with Texas A&M is they have McKinley Jackson back on the defensive line, which I really haven't heard the commentators say much about the fact that he's been out hurt, and having him back, which I don't think was really expected, is a big deal. He's one of the best linemen in the SEC, and they are so young otherwise that his absence or presence is just a really significant thing for the defense. So I'm not shocked that they're getting some pressure. And Alabama's offensive line, let's be real, isn't really fantastic. Oh my gosh, he almost threw another interception. Alabama's going to stop throwing the football the way this game's going. They need a field goal to go up 2 scores, and they almost blew that.
Jalen Milroe is terrible. He's legitimately, he is a running back playing quarterback. He's terrible.
He's been objectively bad in this game. And I don't look, I've seen plenty of quarterbacks look terrible in their first meaningful start. Mac Jones, when he had came in his first start in the Tennessee game that year, wasn't it? Yeah, when Tua got hurt, was bad. And wow, Alabama misses the field goal, so still a one possession game. They're determined.
Their All-American kicker
not
just missed a chip shot field. This is crazy. Texas game, they kind of imploded too. Like a lot of self-inflicted stuff. This is not just Jalen Milroe. He's been terrible tonight, but man, Alabama looks awful. Like I think that not having Bryce Young there has had a trickle-down effect, and mentally they're not really holding it together.
Yeah, no, they're not. They're not. I mean, they still have the lead, so they're not in too much danger, but they're clinging to that lead, and at any point A&M can score and tie the game. And I don't know if A&M scores and ties that I'm not going to think A&M is going to win at that point. I feels like Alabama has to hold this lead if they want to win the game. So it's
and now you're getting what's interesting about it now is that you're getting into 4-down territory, which makes it even harder for their defense.
Yep. Well, it wasn't the last drive, which Fisher, I think, probably could have kicked a field goal. I've got everything muted, but it seemed like they were in field goal range. And if he kicked a field goal there, then they would be touchdown to take the lead. So that, in hindsight, might have been kind of stupid. Last super chat on the board, just to knock it out. Nick said, "Are you guys going to do a Penn State Michigan preview? And do you have any early thoughts about that? Won't give much away if you're going to do a preview. What do you think, Daniel? Are we going to do a preview of Penn State and Michigan?"
Yeah, we So look,
yeah.
we're happy to do smaller games, but if anybody noticed, like we did Kansas TCU this week, and it was one of our worst performing games of the year. Josh Pate did UCLA, Utah, and nobody watched it. And for a Josh Pate video, that's a big deal. So we're a little bit snobs in that regard. Like we're going to chase numbers a little bit for big games. Penn State, Michigan right now is a pick 'em for me, and we'll get into it tomorrow or Monday when we record. But it's a pick 'em for me. I can't, and it's really because of the unknown. Like no result in that game would surprise me because we don't know anything about these teams. I do know that Penn State was able to go on the road and beat an Auburn team as badly as Georgia beat them at home, and maybe a little worse because Penn State was never not in control in that game. Like they ran an offense with identity. So I'll get a better feel for it tomorrow after I watch a little bit more tape, but I don't know right now.
Yeah, I don't know either. I don't know either. And these games are all far from over. That game could go any way. It just feels like all of these games this week or this year are way more unpredictable than we've seen in a long, long time. And so we'll just kind of have to see how it all pans out. I'm kind of buying time because I really don't want to do my top 10 until after this Alabama game ends. Because if Alabama loses this game and we do a top 10, we're just going to have to throw it out. I'd rather not do that.
They just called a face mask on. This is 2 weeks in a row.
No, he did.
Well,
he did.
Yes, but this is 2 weeks in a row where the first face mask was against Alabama. The first face mask was the offensive player, and then the defensive player retaliated with a face mask after they lost leverage, and it was called on the defense, although they never called on the offense. I just think that's interesting. I had a comment today about how it's super frustrating that you could game. And like Georgia would get a 2-yard run, and their offensive line would push the running back forward 10, 15 yards, it seemed. And it's crazy how on a forward progress stop fumble, ball stays with the offense, forward progress is stopped. But if the running back is stopped by the defense and then 3 offensive linemen come in and push him for 15 yards, that's fine. And I just think that's a little ridiculous. It's kind of like how offensive penalties, like it's the reverse. Like with offensive penalties in the red zone, they're so punitive. Like if you get a personal foul on the 2-yard line, you've got 17 yards to go. If you get a personal foul as a defense on the 2-yard line, it's 1 yard to go. So anyway, I just thought that was a little ridiculous. But A&M now carving up Alabama defense. It seems like A&M's offense only works well after Alabama screws up. But hey, 4 turnovers and 2 missed field goals. That's a lot of opportunities for A&M to catch them screwing up.
Yeah, and A-Chain, I don't think there's any doubt really that A-Chain's been the MVP of this game because he's making guys miss in the hole and he's taking the edge. Even though he hasn't done a lot statistically, he's their whole offense, really. Like if they didn't have his speed on the edge and his ability to make guys miss, this offense would not be really functional.
Him and a Haynes King 40-yard pass after a turnover. Because I think 90% of their yardage has come the first play after a turnover. How Alabama doesn't know they're going to take a shot after a turnover, I don't know how they haven't figured that out yet, but that's definitely what's going on. It's interesting here. So A&M still proving me right that they're a 17-point offense. Like if they were playing a normal team today that didn't have a backup quarterback in, fumbling it, throwing interceptions, I don't think they score 10 on Alabama. And I'm not saying this to pump Alabama up. I'm saying this to say that A&M still has some like deeply flawed issues with their offense that they got to figure out.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not pumping up Alabama. I think it's more a huge negative for Alabama, right? Alabama's badness is keeping Texas A&M in this game and letting Texas A&M score. This is not a great football game by any standards, really, on both sides, but it's certainly a suspenseful one. Goes back to my theory. I don't really like soccer, right? But my soccer theory, soccer point, right? Suspense makes sports interesting. This has not been a good football game, but it's been a suspenseful one.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's been interesting to watch. I've got a couple others like NC State, Florida State. We're not talking about so much. Do you want to touch on that for a second? Because that's one that you called. You said you were interested to see it. You felt like Florida State, there were reasons to think Florida State was just the straight up better team, even though they're unranked and NC State is 14th. They're holding on to a 1-point lead, but I certainly don't think they've proved you wrong from the fact that people were sleeping on them.
Yeah, we picked Clemson last week, right, against NC State because we had the offensive production in the passing game hasn't been there. Teams, FCS and bad G5 teams, their quarterbacks are outperforming Devin Leary against the same competition. And tonight, Devin Leary's 5.9 yards per attempt. I mean, I think Florida State's got a good defense. They got a good pass defense. But 5.9 yards per attempt and 130 yards total. They're 5.4 yards because 3 guys have thrown a pass tonight. 5.4 yards an attempt passing, 3.8 yards rushing. They've got systemic issues on the offensive side of the ball. And it's interesting for a team that was top 10 coming into the season and has their roster back. Something has happened to Devin Leary, and I don't know what.
Yeah, they've been a couple of those. Van Dyke too, right? Yeah. I cannot explain what happened to Van Dyke. He's not. Anybody in the comments is a great one for you to chime in if you can explain to me what in the world happened to Van Dyke, because Miami's passing game is not the same passing game that it was last year. Mike Farino, I forgot who said it, might have been y'all, but A&M is just Iowa plus. It sounds like something you would say, Daniel, but that's probably an accurate statement.
So I think that you've got two situations where the offensive coordinator situation is one that is a problem with the head coach. Ferentz at Iowa's got his kid calling the plays, and after last year where they're like 110th in scoring offense, they gave him a $50,000 raise. I don't know why. It's not like he's going to go anywhere else. And it's not like he earned it. And it's embarrassing how bad they are this year. Like they're getting like a touchdown a game. It's embarrassing. And sometimes that touchdown comes from 2 safeties and a field goal. Texas A&M, with the talent they get, has no business. Like they should be blowing Alabama out right now. Alabama's turned the ball over 4 times and kicked 2 field goals and had a bunch of 3-and-outs. They should be blowing Alabama out right now. But they just don't have a good offense. And, we said this at the end of our preview last week. Jimbo Fisher, and even if he wins this game tonight, it doesn't in any way prove that he's on the right track, his hubris is keeping him from having a better than 8-4 team. His hubris is keeping him at where they are because he won't go out and get a real offensive coordinator, let him run the show, and him step back and be a CEO.
So I'm about to get Daniel worked up here. So some people all are chiming in with the same response for what Van Dyke's problem in it. And Isaac Adkins is the one that threw in the super chat. Josh Gaddis is Miami's problem. So I'll just put my mic on mute for a minute, drink some water. Go ahead.
Look, Josh Gaddis, this is a guy that had no business being given the keys at Michigan, and Michigan benefited from him having a less of an impact in the offense last year down the stretch, and this year as well. Josh Gaddis, I think, is a little bit of a fraud. You don't take a guy that's never called plays and have him be your OC at Michigan. You just don't. So I think that was bad to begin with. But the fact that he went from Michigan to Miami kind of tells you all you need to know. That's a step down. That's not a lateral move even. That's a step down. He was asked to leave implicitly or explicitly. So, yeah, I could see that being the problem with the quarterback situation.
Yeah. There's one. We got another super chat here that's maybe up your alley. Michael Baumert said top 3 this year is easy for me. Number 1, Blanton's. Number 2, Basil Hayden. Number 3, Copper City. Preferred drinkability. Daniel, what is your most important top 3? This is tough to deal with monetization and whatnot, but I'll let you try to answer that question.
I mean, I love Blanton's. I think it's a little popular to bag on Blanton's because of where their price point is right now. I don't think that they can justify the price they get in the secondary market. I also think that Blanton's is tough because each bottle is a little different based on how it's cooked. But honestly, I like let's see. Wild Turkey rare breed is my go-to, my everyday go-to. This Russell's single barrel is untouchable. And at retail price, Buffalo Trace for $29, you can't beat it. But the one value pick I'll say is if you can get it, it's seasonal. But the Costco brand, like their high-end small batch, is just $17.92, and it's the same price, $17.92, but you get 50% more. That's the best deal you're going to get. But if you can get Buffalo Trace for $29, you're not going to beat it.
Yeah, I can't comment a lot. I like it all, but I don't know with nearly as much as Daniel, so I'll leave it there. Man, it's like A&M is just not moving, and then hitting the one play they need to keep the drive alive. Our feed, so there's a huge delay, which is why we don't do too much play-by-play stuff, but it's 3rd and 11 here. Yeah, it's been
and we
interesting
saw
and tough.
what I said before with the amount of time that's on the clock. They were in 4th down territory. They went for 4th and 2 and got it. So we'll see what they do in 3rd and 11. But this is what happens when you mess around with even a bad team, is you let them get into territory where it's, being able to go for it on every 4th down if you have to is a massive advantage. It's almost like 2-point conversion situation, in overtime where you know what you got to do. 2-point conversion or field goal or touchdown. You know what you got to do based on that information. So you go for it on 4th down if they scored a touchdown, So I think that they're in this kind of similar situation where it's a huge kind of artificial advantage, but it's an advantage once you let somebody hang around and you miss a bunch of field goals. Shocking that a Nick Saban team missed field goals, right?
Yeah, it's it seems like the hallmark of every Nick Saban loss is at least 2 missed field goals, false start. Actually, this false start's interesting. It brings up something I thought of in the Georgia game. It seems like a lot of offensive lines these days are actually having the tackles jump, and it's been kind of odd to me to see when the refs do and don't call it. I think it was Georgia. I can't remember if it was Georgia or Auburn in that game, but one of their tackles was jumping like every play. He was maybe a half click ahead of the snap, and they didn't call it. So it's just kind of an advantage to the tackle. And that time they called it on Texas A&M, and I think they probably could have chosen not to if they'd wanted to. It was the right call, but yeah, It is what it is.
Now
Wow,
it's 4th and 18.
Back to
Yeah.
back false starts, and yeah, guys, the um, we try not to do the play by play, and I don't know where it's in sync with you, depending on your cable feed, but it's often so far behind that if we were to do it, it would just drive you insane. So we're commenting on the game without commenting on the exact thing. It's a little tougher when we get a
So
little
here's
closer.
one. Bruce Rivers says, Daniel and Josh, who do you guys think are the best hires for Nebraska and Wisconsin? This is a good question. Because Nebraska and Wisconsin are in a tough spot because I'm not sure what they can do to get a guy that's really going to move the needle for them. And I think this is what I say, the same thing for Auburn if they fire Harsin. You got to get a guy that brings an elite offensive or defensive system to the game, because right now you're at a recruiting disadvantage. So bring a guy that can neutralize that talent gap with an offensive system. And if they don't do that, then they're in trouble. The problem with Wisconsin is they've already got an elite defensive coordinator who's got an elite defensive system. I think Wisconsin needs to get into the modern era of college football offensively, which means they've got to look offense, in my opinion, because they are at a huge talent gap, especially if they want to make any moves in a Big Ten championship game. Like, you can even win the Big Ten West and still be 30 points worse than the best teams in the Big Ten. So for them, that's what I think. For Nebraska, I don't know.
But did you not just describe what Nebraska did that put them in a hole in the first place, right? Because they made that move to modernize their offense and hired, names escaping me right now, but hired a head coach that was going to run a modern scheme, and the team went in the toilet because they didn't really have the personnel to do what they were trying to do. And they kind of did the same thing with Scott Frost, and it didn't work. So I am with you to a large extent, but at the same time, I feel like if you throw away that identity, do you actually have a viable path to anything else? Can you recruit well enough at Wisconsin to play the same brand of football that Maryland's playing or that Ohio State's playing, and to do it better than them? And I don't know that question is so easily answered because of the recruiting base and whatnot. There are a lot of really good linemen in the Midwest. There are a lot of them playing in the NFL, and it's just not an area that is teaming with high-end skill position players. And I think they've been running a system that was well geared for the players they had. But I don't know what's going to really work. And that is the one thing I will excuse Ferentz for, is that, yeah, they're ugly and the offense is terrible, but maybe that's kind of the team they need to be for who they are and where they're at. And I don't know if something else is going to necessarily work. So,
to me, the analog is Auburn, though.
You guys in the comments throw out suggestions, because I'm kind of curious to hear what people think up with, because it's tough. The answers to these questions are tough.
I think that the analog is Auburn, because Auburn brought in a guy that was like, he was a guy who preached hard work, fundamental, toughness, sound, offensive, defensive, whatever, work hard in the weight room. That's the ground floor in the SEC. Like that used to be something that was a competitive advantage, that if you're a good all-around coach in any league 20 years ago. Now that's the ground floor, right? Like, Sam Pittman brings all of that to the table at Arkansas, and they might go 6-6 this year, right? So
Yeah.
At Nebraska, I think that the big thing with Nebraska and Wisconsin is that there is such a talent disadvantage against the teams that they're playing, if they want to be who their brand used to be, that they've got to do something to neutralize it. And Auburn should have done it too, and they didn't.
Yeah, and that's, it's kind of funny. I don't know that he's had the greatest year, but guys like Malzahn can be really good fits, I think, for those kinds of programs. But the truth is, there's not like there's that many of them floating around, guys you can hire. A hot one probably is going to be Lane Kiffin for some of those jobs. He's somebody that fits the mold. But we were talking about this elsewhere. I mean, Lane Kiffin makes over $7 million a year at Ole Miss, and so people are going to put his name on like the Nebraska list and a bunch of these others. I don't know that they've really got the money to outbid Ole Miss and pull them away. I mean, they can spend more than Ole Miss, but it's not like you can just roll up the Brinks truck spend $8 million and get him, right? You're going to have to offer him an absolute top tier salary and probably a lot of money guaranteed. I don't know how many people really want to do that. Somebody said Matt Campbell. I don't know. I don't think his star is that bright, and he doesn't have a lot of experience running a major program, and he's never really shown that he can recruit at a high level, which is part of the problem we're talking about right now, right? So, yeah, I think these are really difficult questions to answer, and I don't know what the answer is. Let me ask you a question in this vein, and this is maybe more difficult than it appears. Do you think Brian Harsin is really a bad coach, or is he a coach
No.
and a really bad fit?
I think he's a bad coach because I don't think he's a bad coach at all. Like I think that he would be successful elsewhere. I think that he doesn't generate any recruiting heat at all. So he's not going to win those battles against Nick Saban or Kirby Smart. And then the stuff that he does well, they're already doing. That's what I think.
Yeah.
3rd and 3, I probably wouldn't have run up the middle with Jace McClellan there. I probably would have tried to do something where Jalen Milroe could run, but that's just me.
Yeah, well, they're doing, so Alabama's going to end up punting the ball here. And they gave it as much eye candy as they could, and they just tried to steamroll, and they weren't successful. So it looks like Texas A&M is going to get the ball and a chance to win the game. So this one's going to come down to the wire. Somebody said Kendall Briles at Nebraska. That's an interesting one. Now, the Briles situation is complicated because of his father and Baylor and how much an administration wants to stomach it. A lot easier for teams to take somebody as an offensive coordinator than it is for an AD or a president to sign off on somebody being the head coach. And now Kendall Briles was not implicated in those reports, and so he was sort of distanced. But there is a certain amount of how much do you really think that the son didn't have any idea the kind of program the father was running? Do you want someone like that involved running your program? I don't know. I think teams would take a shot on him at this point. It's been long enough, but it's a decent question. Brian Ferentz at Nebraska. Hey, Iowa's called their shot. They've made sure no one is ever going to poach Brian Ferentz from them. That's that next level thinking, locking him down, making sure that doesn't go anywhere.
I don't know what you do. Like some people are saying Harsin at Nebraska. I honestly could see that being a better fit. Certainly better than Auburn. You can't bring a guy like Harsin in expecting to win any recruiting battles. And I think that was the biggest issue for me is that that's the lifeblood of a program. And he wasn't going to get it done ever. So it's really interesting. We're also, y'all were a little distracted because we did this same thing last year. We were live when Alabama played Mississippi State because they were 3-2 coming in the game, so CBS didn't pick it up. So when A&M beat them, we were live and we were dead focused on that. But this feels a lot like the LSU game last year. I think that LSU had a similar situation where they got the ball late to win it, maybe, and Alabama defense held them, which may or may not happen here, but it feels like a little bit different situation than the light at the scoreboard game last year in College Station.
And I will say, we'll see how it turns out, but here's my thing with it. On that last drive that A&M had where they got down in field goal range, they ran it a lot with A-Chain, and with 1:50, no timeouts, they can't do that anymore. And I'm kind of curious if they can actually run a pass-first offense and move the ball down without taking negative plays. Like they got 3 yards on first down.
They're going to take a shot at some point. They're going to take a shot because that's the only thing that they've had a lot of success with throwing the ball today is that.
Yeah, and we're probably going to be a little quiet because just like you guys, we're going to be watching this as it comes down the wire because you got about 80 seconds, give or take, incompletions. Texas A&M lineman goes down with a hurt knee. And so he'll come off, and then A&M will take a 10-second runoff.
Is there a runoff there? Yeah, because there will be timeouts.
Yeah, there will be under 2 minutes, so it'll be 10 seconds off, and then ball on the snap, I think. But that means we get a little bit of time.
Yeah, and there's a commercial now. There was a super chat from Nick with Mike Hart having a seizure on the sideline, being carted off. How much, in your opinion, can that mess with the player's focus and performance? We talked about that about an hour ago because I think it was Benjamin V that asked about Michigan's performance. Michigan pulled away late. I think that they were reasonably upset, and you could see them on the sidelines. They were reasonably upset with what happened. You don't expect that. That's incredibly jarring as a player. I'm really not taking much negative or positive anything from Michigan today on that game. I'm not killing them for struggling for 3/4 with Indiana at all, because that's a horrible situation to have to deal with, just kind of in stream while you're trying to focus on football.
Yeah, it's tough. There are things that are more important than football, believe it or not. And these guys have really close bonds with their coaches, and obviously, a coach being sent to the hospital, having a seizure on the sideline,
So
they were going to be more concerned. And frankly, it's justified for them to be more concerned, right? I mean, you want to be where your feet are, as people say, but I don't blame them at all for being rattled about that. Obviously, that was a very realistic thing. So, Texas A&M center is now going out of the game with an injury. I don't think we'll see him again. And for a team that's now in pass first, pass second, pass third mode, really not ideal to be down another lineman versus this pass rush. Oddly, it's an advantage to some degree to regroup and get some plays called, but I think in some ways it's almost better for Alabama's defense that they had time to sort of rest, make sure their pass rushers on the field, and
even though 7 of their players were looking to the sideline when the ball was snapped, just there on 3rd and 1, that was interesting. Yeah, what's interesting also to me is, wow, did he catch that? Holy cow. Interception just went through the hands of Alabama into Stewart's hands. So they're in striking distance here. That's interesting.
yeah.
So coming into this game, I thought that Alabama went with Milroe, probably could have gone with Bryce Young because they had room to lose a game. They're still going to win the West, right? They had a little bit of room that they can lose a game and still make the playoffs, because if they're probably going to win the West. But the question is, if Bryce Young's still hurt next week and they lose to Tennessee, that's pretty tough in terms of playoff implications, right? Like you feel like you can lose this game and still be okay, but you really kind of don't want. You want to have next week in the bag against a better team if Bryce Young's not able to play.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. This game doesn't really matter. I'm not sure why they're reviewing this because I can't see any reason it's not a catch. But yeah,
They're trying to give CBS opportunity to go to another commercial break because the clock was running.
Gosh. Yeah, if you're a Big Ten fan watching this feed right now, this is going to be a reality. The commercials from this game. I think they did the thing that CBS always does where there's like kickoff, commercial break, run a play, quarter ends, commercial break. Like then there was like a punt or something, commercial break. It was like they played 3 minutes of football and 3 commercial breaks. It's painful. And honestly, I think it affects teams in these games. They have a hard time getting offensive rhythm sometimes because there are so many commercial breaks. I think it has a really tangible effect. And I think you can talk about it being the biggest matchup, but I honestly think it kind of causes more upsets because teams get a little out of whack having to deal with everything. Alabama, this is like the second or third time I've seen this. They are not getting lined up well defensively. It seems like they're constantly looking around and talking to each other and not really lined up on the snap, and it's keeping them from being able to rush the passer worth a flip.
Yeah, and I think that it's always out of these stoppages, which is really interesting. Are they going to call a penalty on the hit on the quarterback? That's holding.
Okay.
And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people maybe it's defensive holding. Yeah, it's defensive holding. I think that's probably the right call there. Spot foul should be. There's for all the people that are saying that the SEC refs are bailing out Alabama. I think that it's been a pretty well called game. Honestly, I think it's been pretty good.
Yeah, 45 seconds was going to get harder and harder for me to pay attention to anything but this game. It was number 1 on the ropes.
Is that intentional grounding? Because I don't know if he got out of the pocket there. That looked like
Oh
grounding to
no.
me. Yeah, he did not get out of the pocket. He took 2 steps to the right.
Ooh,
Uh,
I think he's right at the tackle. They're probably going to give it to him. He's right at the outer edge, outer arm of the tackle. They're going to give him that. That was close. That was close.
they're showing a stat for the people on the podcast. Last blown lead was the
Of 10 plus
2016.
points. Yeah.
Yeah, up to 10 plus points was 2016-17 national title game against Clemson. And I can't focus on anything. Wow. Play to the end zone, throw to the end zone. Going to be 3rd and 10. Haynes King is taking an absolute beating tonight, and I got to give him a lot of credit because this guy has been absolutely, especially with the like. It's not only like yes, Alabama has a great pass rush, and they've got Dallas Turner and Will Anderson and all these guys, but he's also without now I think 3 offensive linemen, and he's just getting every play. And so I've actually grown a lot more impressed with Haynes King, especially as just a mule strength kind of guy from this game than anything else, win, lose, or draw.
He's actually getting so beat up now. Well, he's putting the ball and another good throw. Looks like another first down.
Yeah, this is wow. I mean, out of his mind, and a crappy quarterback playing out of his mind against Alabama is nothing new, really.
Yeah, and they're going down, so they're going to spike it, or they're going to call a play. So 20, 19, 18. No, they're going to spike. I don't know how I feel about that because they burn 6 or 7 seconds.
Yeah,
I think they might as well just have thrown a play there. They got about 3 shots. 3 shots downfield. I feel like A&M's receivers, Muhammad and Stewart in particular, really grown up in this game. They were not making great plays to this point in the year.
Muhammad was great last week. Even in that loss, he kind of jumped out on the tape for me. But yeah, this is now was that in the pocket? Like
no,
I feel like he's running straight backwards and just throwing it away.
They're gonna give him every benefit of the doubt with this offensive line being what it is. Let's see where he ends up. He's at the tackle, but they're still not going to do it. They probably could have called it.
Maybe 3 plays, but it's 3rd and 10. So, this is so interesting. Like this is so interesting for us. I think we're behind a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too. So lining up for this next snap. Does he go? No, darn it, intercepted. So there you go. Flag.
But there's a flag down. What are they calling?
Flag?
Are they calling a pass interference? Because that was, I mean, he threw it in like triple coverage. You definitely can't say the refs are bailing out Bama if they throw a defensive pass interference into like triple coverage Hail Mary.
And the game can end in a penalty, so they would get 1 play.
Flag in the end zone pass interference would give them a play.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they get a play.
Yeah.
I didn't see the play in real time.
I didn't either. So
they're circling branch.
What?
Well, that was not. Wow, that is an unbelievable. Like, look, I think that the refs have called this game great. That little bit of jersey tug, I can't believe they called a pass interference on that. But wow, you cannot blame the refs. You can't blame the refs.
I was about to say, and this is an odd situation for Alabama because they've got to decide whether or not they want to call a timeout here because it gives Texas A&M more time to decide what they want to do because they can't call timeout, so they had to call whatever snap they could get done on the sideline, but they probably had enough time to call the play they wanted to call. And at this point, they're going to essentially run a 2-point conversion.
I'm honestly like that's a pretty crazy to me. I don't like bailout pass interference plays. This is another thing that's like super punitive for the defense because they were on the 25-yard line or something. So now they get it on the don't they get it on like the 2 or 3 because it's happened in the end zone?
They'll get it. Yeah, they'll get it on the 2, and it feels like this is poetry lining up for Alabama to lose this game, right? Because they've had 2 field goals that were missed. That makes this a game where they should be up 28, where A&M is trying to score and get a 2-point conversion to tie. Instead, they have an opportunity to score and win the game with 3 seconds left. So let's see. Here we go, live for us.
Ball game.
Throw it. Wow, threw it out of bounds. It wasn't a catchable ball.
I was impressed with their first touchdown, where they ran that stick against. They had the matchup and the slot receiver and the linebacker. I was impressed with that play call that they clearly drew up from what they saw. They called a timeout here, which, like you said, let the defense kind of get adjusted, or somebody called a timeout. I can't believe off a timeout, that's what they came up with. That was amazing to me that's what they came up with, because that's kind of, one, it's a low percentage throw. You've really got to groove it in there. 2, you're not doing anything relative to coverage. So that's pretty wild. Haynes King is beating himself up on the video right now, but man, he played a good game. And look, everybody's going to say that this means Alabama sucks, blah, blah, blah. But I want to say to anybody out there that's got a top team, take your best running back, put them at quarterback, and tell me if you win this game. You probably don't.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. There was a team a few years ago that had this problem when we were ranking them, where they lost their quarterback and they were playing poorly. But the question is, how quickly do you drop somebody down the rankings when the quarterback's playing poorly before they haven't lost yet? And my thing is usually like a couple weeks. Alabama's going to get Bryce Young back next week. If Bryce Young plays in this game, Alabama wins this game by
40 points.
I don't know, 40, but probably 30.
I think 40, because here's the thing. Like, Alabama's offense moved the ball just running it. Like, just running the ball, they moved it just fine. And all of A&M's points came off of turnovers or that last missed field goal. Like, all of it came off of mistakes. I think Alabama, like, this offense was so non-functional. I think Alabama wins this game by 40 points. And look, I think this is a good segue to do top 10s, because I'm going to upset some Georgia fans. But yeah, Killtack9 said, I'm not dead, because he said earlier he's going to die watching Alabama play. I think everyone should be talking about how good Bryce Young actually is, which is a good segue based on what we're talking about now. Bryce Young, honestly, like, the difference between Bryce Young on this team and not on this team is probably Alabama going 8-4, 9-3 versus maybe winning a national championship. That's how good he is. And we've had our criticisms of him in the past, but this game kind of illuminated to me how big of a difference maker he is, and probably on the sidelines made himself some money tonight.
Yeah, no, I think he did. Well, I will say one thing for both these teams. The quarterback play in this game was so bad. I think Texas A&M may have to reevaluate their starting quarterback situation and whether or not they want to give Connor Wegman a real chance. And I get why you don't put him in on the road in his first meaningful action. And I don't know how much of the playbook he has, but you've got to start to wonder whether or not you need to let him play, because Haynes King is like,
is it the quarterback? Is it the quarterback? Because I think it's the system. And if it's, look, how many quarterbacks at A&M have we seen under Jimbo or at Florida State under Jimbo struggle? Like, okay, you replace Haynes King with a different 5-star quarterback. They're probably also going to struggle because their offensive system is ass.
Yeah, I don't know. Like the last play call, I don't know how much of it's the play call, how much was the quarterback. But rewatching it, it's dawning on me that even if Evan Stewart had caught that pass, he was not in the end zone.
Yeah.
He was diving backwards for the ball. He would not have scored.
You got to do one of two things there. Either an in cut or a stick on them in the middle of the field, or something in space. Like even let Hans King run it there because he's a good runner. I can't believe that they got a far boundary throw. That was wild.
But what I'm also getting at, if you're Alabama, so they've got Wegman, and then Alabama has Ty Simpson. So they've both got like 5-star quarterbacks that are freshmen. If you're Alabama and you had to play without Bryce Young for an extended period, at what point do you really start to go, well, crap, maybe we need to get the other guy ready? Because Milroe did a lot with his legs to help them, but the fumbles were a huge negative. If Alabama doesn't fumble the ball in this game, they win this game by a significant margin.
Yeah.
And then passing the ball, he was incompetent. So I don't know what they've got out of the guy. Maybe he's not good enough to play, but and I don't know what A&M has out of Wegman. Man, I don't know if you're Alabama that you really feel like it's viable to start him. And this, I'm going to say one more thing. Well, Mike Farino says Zach Calzada wins that game probably. I think he's right. I think Farino's right. I think Zach Calzada hit just a couple more things. Well, not with a bum shoulder because he's not healthy, but yeah.
But does Bryce Young come in if that game's 21-17 A&M at the half? Like that's the other thing that we're not considering is that Bryce Young probably could have played tonight, and you don't insert him with 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter when you have a lead, right? You don't insert him for that. But so how the game played out, it was hard to get him in there late. There were a couple of plays away from having a double-digit lead late in that game. But if Alabama was losing because they got some good quarterback play on the A&M side, I think you might see Bryce Young.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's tough to judge. Somebody was saying, well, maybe this is a good time to transition. So knowing we'll cut this up, I'll let Daniel slide into his discussion of the weekly top 10. And then remembering we need to give a shout out to our wonderful sponsors at some point, but yeah.
All right, so top 10, and we really do have to go because it's already 10:37 Central, 11:37 Eastern. I go to Ohio State number 1 still. I have questions on the defense, not so much that they've done anything really poorly defensively. The thing that I've lamented for a few years now, Ohio State's not facing elite quarterbacks. They're not facing good offenses. So I don't know what to think their defense can do because they're not facing teams that are good enough. I've still got Alabama number 2. Everybody can come at me. They can get mad at me, whatever they want. Georgia had to come from behind late last week at home against a team that's probably worse than A&M with their starting quarterback. So the way I look at it is like this. Alabama's defense is better than Georgia's defense. Josh, do you think that's true or false?
I think that's true right now. Alabama's defense is the best in the country at the moment. And I think I saw a chart statistically, S&P and FEI and almost everything else, they're pulling away from everybody.
Alabama's offense with Bryce Young is better than Georgia's offense. Yes or no?
I would agree with that right now.
Okay. So Alabama number 2, if y'all want to tell me with Bryce Young, like, look, if Jalen Milroe is the guy for the next month, then I'm going to adjust. But with Bryce Young, somebody tell me that they would pick Georgia over Alabama today, and we can talk about it. I got Georgia number 3 because I do think that they're still dominant. I don't love what I saw even today in stretches, but they handle their business. I can't get at them too much. Tennessee still at number fun of me for the last 2 weeks for having Tennessee at number 4. I will give my explanation. I didn't do a good job of it last. At this point, when there's so much of just a logjam of, I don't want to say mediocrity, but sameness from 4 to 14, there's nobody else on this list down the line that has an elite anything. I think Tennessee has a bad defense with an elite offense, which means they have a higher ceiling than anybody else in this list because nobody else in this list has an elite offense or defense. And Penn State fans might get at me on the defensive side, but I don't think they're elite. I think for that reason, Tennessee has the headroom. Also, they went and murdered on the road an LSU team that was banged up, but still handle their business. I got Michigan at number 5. And this is, I think, maybe a little bit of shuffling now. But Michigan at number 5. I didn't love what I saw if I don't have the context of Mike Hart in today's game for 3 quarters against Indiana. But honestly, like, did happen. And I do feel like it affected them for 2 games. I'm not taking anything hugely good or hugely bad away from Michigan from what I saw today. We are still in this place where they haven't really played anybody, and I don't know how to evaluate them. I've got Clemson at number 6. I kind of want to move them down a little more because I think it was 10-3 at half against Boston College. They ended up pulling away late, but that's a really bad team. I can't underscore how much they are bad. This is where some more shuffling happens. I got Penn State at number 7, ahead of Oklahoma State, who struggled with Tech, who I think is a good team, but struggled with them at home. Absolutely could have lost that game. They've got some defensive issues in my mind. Southern Cal now has struggled with multiple bad teams. I would say mediocre teams. Oregon State, Washington State, these are mediocre teams that Southern Cal is either having to win late on or pull away from, which tells me that they've got some warts. Ole Miss did romp Vanderbilt eventually. I think it was 52-28, but they were losing for a large chunk of that game. And offensively, I think they've had some issues throughout the year that gives me concerns. And they've yet to play a really good offense. So when they do play a really good offense and they have to meet their level, I have some concerns that they're going to be able to do that. That's my top 10, Josh. Give me yours.
So my number 1, the same as yours, and I think it's pretty obvious, is Ohio State. Ohio State is the most complete team on both sides of the ball. They had a little bit of a hiccup in week 1. Obviously, JSN was a big part of their offense. He went down. It's forgivable, and they've played at a very high level since. Anybody that wants to – it's kind of funny that Ohio State fans sometimes get up on us in the comments and all about the rest of the rankings. That it's not really a question to me, frankly, right now, that Ohio State is number 1 on mine. It's really the rest of it that's difficult. My number 2 is Alabama, and my number 3 is Georgia, same as you. And I know people are going to be upset about that. Look, we said it in our live show early on. This was when Alabama was up by like 10 or 14. We've said it many years previously. The one thing I will largely excuse, especially in one-off situation, is a team that loses their starting quarterback. Teams very, very rarely play anywhere near to their potential in their starting quarterback. In situations where the starting quarterback is out. Alabama's in that situation. If they play bad next week, we'll have a very different conversation after Tennessee. But, you know, they had a game where they turned it over 4 times. They found a way to win. The defense played well. The offense generally played well, actually rushed for almost 300 yards. And, you know, I can only dock them so much. And you can make the comparison with Georgia, Missouri, and I would, but I would say that's sort of the reason why I can't jump Georgia over Alabama is that Georgia's had their own slow games. And that's keeping me from saying Georgia is the more complete team overall because they have the same warts Alabama does, and it kind of cancels out a little bit. But Georgia, even today against Auburn, was really anemic for about a half. And even when Georgia's been anemic, they've been anemic with their starting quarterback. So it's a little less forgivable. That is more who Georgia is, and I don't think today was necessarily who Alabama is. Again, next Saturday is another day. This is just a fun top 10 for rankings, and none of this matters. All that really matters is where you're going to be ranked in 6 weeks from now, but that's just where I'm at right now. Michigan is my number 4. I think Michigan took a little while to get going, but as we talked about that, Mike Hart having a seizure on the sideline does take the wins out of yourselves a lot. These kids are more concerned about their coaches and they're winning a football game, as they should be. And when they got going, they got going. Corum, I've said all year, I said in the preseason, is one of the most explosive players in the country. I said in the preseason, I felt like Notre Dame was ranked where Michigan should be ranked, and Michigan has proven me right all year so far. I have no reason to drop them any further. My number 5 is Clemson. Clemson continues to play at a pretty high level. They are not wowing me. They took a while to start pulling away today against a very bad Boston College team, but the defense is very, very good. The offense, when it needs to, can move the ball. It is a lot better than they were last year. It's still not good, which says a lot about where they were at last year, but it is a lot better than it was last year. And I think their more complete than my number 6, and my number 6 is Tennessee. I don't like Tennessee's defense very much. They played LSU today in a game where LSU lost their starting left tackle to illness overnight. They lose their starting left guard in the first quarter, and LSU's offense just totally collapsed. I think that probably made us overreact a little bit to Tennessee's defensive improvement, but LSU's defense is pretty good. I don't consider them as good as some people do, but they have great pass rushers. There's a reason to think they could give Tennessee problems, and Tennessee moved the ball great. They have one of the better offenses, it sure looks like, and we're going to see a major test next week against them, between them and Alabama. And if you complain about the rankings between those two, that's going to take care of itself a week from now. So it's definitely more academic than anything else. My number 7 is Oklahoma State. That one's tough. Texas Tech played them close. Texas Tech could have won that game. Texas Tech did beat Texas for a reason. I think Texas Tech is a team that's really actually just pretty darn good and more than capable of being a spoiler. I think Oklahoma's State is lucky to be in this position and Texas not. I think those two teams are going to be in a, maybe with TCU 3-way battle for the Big 12. It's certainly hyper competitive. And I don't have a lot of confidence that Oklahoma State's going to hold their position, but they have played well to date. They've won their games. They stay where they're at. My number 8, and I feel a little guilty about it, frankly, is Penn State. I almost feel like they should be higher, but they're not sitting out there being anybody for me to move them up. It's kind of the tough thing. And I think their win over Auburn continues to look more and more impressive. And again, they did that when TJ Finley was healthy for a half. Georgia had the advantage of playing Ashford for a full game. And so, yeah, I think they're at number 8 in the next 3 weeks or so. They're going to have a chance to pull away and make a bigger difference. My number 9 is USC. I had that game up in the corner. The Alabama game was obviously the hot topic, but I was following that one pretty closely. And USC looked good. They didn't look stellar. And we were talking earlier about schedules. And, man, I'm not sold on the pack. I'm not sold on the teams USC's played. They're going to have to play probably Utah and UCLA for me to really feel like comfortable saying they're better. Between those two and Notre Dame, we're going to get a good picture for them this year. We just aren't there yet. And they kind of ran the ball to dig out of a hole and put away a Washington State team that is, I think, pretty average. And yeah, they were more or less in control, but it wasn't pretty. My 10, like Daniel, is Ole Miss. They're sort of sitting there by default. I'm not really sold on them by any stretch of the imagination. They didn't look great for about a quarter and a half against Vanderbilt. They did pull away at the end of the game. And honestly, when you're working through these, it's really a lot of them, it's just teams that are undefeated, which my whole metric has always been when I try to compare two teams, how did you do if you take these two teams and you swap schedules with each other? How would you have done with his schedule and how would you have done with the other person's schedule? And when someone's undefeated, it's hard to really argue that somebody would lose a game. And quite frankly, anybody from about 6 to 25 is interchangeable and feels like they could lose on a daily basis. I do not feel like these top 10 rankings will stay this way. I think some of these teams are going to fall precipitously. I maybe this is the thing I'll end on, Daniel. Maybe I don't know if you agree with me or not. I feel like it's more likely than not that one of the teams in the top 10 right now from our rankings is going to end up unranked. That's how much I feel like there is still to be decided because of backloaded schedules and the volatility of the sport this year. Maybe that's an overreaction, but do you think it's an overreaction? I mean, do you agree with me on that?
I think inside the top 10, that is not in the top 25 quality teams in the country. I think it's late in the season, so it'd be hard for them just from the math standpoint to get unranked, but I think it's very possible. Some Ohio State fans said number 1 Ohio State and then everybody else, which, look, I've got Ohio State number 1 and I've had them there for 2 weeks now, so I have the credibility to say this. Ohio State has beaten a bunch of really bad teams, and a team that lost to Marshall and beat BYU by 8 points tonight. So I don't think that any team in the country, this includes Bama, this includes Georgia, any undefeated team, whatever, there's no fan base of any undefeated team right now that should say we're going to walk away with it. That's where I am right now. And that I think is fun But I think that, like, look, if Alabama goes up to Neyland next week with a healthy Bryce Young and wins, 34-10, they should not come out of that game saying, "Oh, well, we're going to walk away with it now because this was just a blip." Because of, like, everybody's got warts this year. That's what's really fun about it. The issue is, and I think we're seeing a little bit of maybe that 5 through 25 materialize as teams that wouldn't win a playoff. But I will also say that, to me, Penn State is the one that we don't know about. Um, I have this frustration, Josh, and you can talk about it a little bit, about if Penn State beats Michigan or Michigan beats Ohio State, those three teams, there's so little we know about those teams. The only data point we really have is this win against a bad Auburn team, and we're giving them a lot of credit because they beat them badly. But I still don't know what I need to know about any conference this year.
Yeah, and it's tough too because that was a bit of a close game, and then they got up on them, and then frankly, I think Auburn kind of quit, and I still don't quite know how to evaluate that because it's not a good Auburn team. LSU did beat that Auburn team, and we just saw LSU get thumped. Georgia struggled with them off and on, but did put them away pretty handily. I don't know. I don't know how to take it. And we run into this a lot, right? Where you've got teams that are sort of undefeated by default due to schedules about midway through the season. You always have teams that are good teams, legitimately good teams, and we know it, but they've played 5 teams that aren't really that capable of beating them. And so they end up undefeated. And when they play each other, necessarily you're going to have someone that's an undefeated that beats another team that's an undefeated. Does that really mean that they're like a top 5 team? And I don't mind bumping them up somewhat, but what I think the media is kind of bad about in those situations is they go, "Oh, you beat a top 10, you have a top 10 win. You're number 4 now." And they just like throw you all the way up the ladder. Really until like week 9, you've got to be a little bit skeptical, a little bit slow in overreacting to one win or the other. And the reality is that every week, 50% of teams win and 50% of teams lose. And so it is obviously natural that you've got teams that are undefeated and they play each other and someone wins or someone loses. But what I'm really getting at is when the schedules like Michigan's this year really is quite weak. I mean, it honestly is quite weak. They're going to come into that game undefeated. And if Penn State beats Michigan, like I'm going to move Penn State up and I'm going to assume it because of the landscape of college football. If this was a tougher year, I might be a lot more skeptical. And if you want to make the argument that if Penn State beats Michigan, that they need to jump Alabama or Georgia, that's going to be a hard conversation to have. And that's just sort of the challenge of top 10s. It's the challenge of scheduling, the challenge of college football where ain't nobody played nobody, right? But that is, I think, the reality of it this year. And yeah, I don't know. A lot of teams are going to win and a lot of teams are going to lose. And it seems like every week is really a random number generator on who lays an egg. So I think there's more than enough chaos in front of us.
And Josh, this is maybe a good kind of down moment to talk about how, we've gotten a lot of super chats tonight. It's been awesome. One of the things that we love to do when we get a sponsor, somebody that supports the channel, we love to kind of encourage y'all to really support those sponsors and those folks that really kind of help us out. We don't do a lot of Patreon and things like that, but one of the things that we do is we kind of team up with sponsors sometimes. And this year, Bird Dogs has sponsored us, at least this week. And we did in our previews, I think a lot of people saw, we did some ad reads there. But I do want to say, like, product wise, it's awesome. Absolutely. Like, I wore Bird Dogs before we even contacted them. And that's we're really selective about the people we do business with. Bird Dogs is sponsoring us this week, and it is CFB Nerds is our promo code. You get a free rope hat if you buy any of their products using that promo code. And Josh, for me, I did say it in the video, I wear a lot of shorts, but I bought the pants for me because I travel in them, and they're not baggy pleated khaki pants. They fit me good. They make my butt look awesome. So I do want to put that out there. But anything you want to say about Bird Dogs before I do the final read for them?
I mean, they're good clothing, and I'm someone that is enough of a nerd to have a hard time to figure out how to dress. And I found them to be high quality. I found them to be comfortable. And I've always been a little bit jealous of my wife that I'll go buy, the fancy Lululemon Omega stuff. And and it's nice and it looks like it fits well and she loves it. And they don't really have stuff like that for guys. And I feel like Bird Dogs does sort of fit that niche. I will say right now, wearing Bird Dog shorts. And if you can see, yeah, lovely pale legs of mine.
Whoa, we got a product demo. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And they're comfy and they're aligned. So I'm very comfortable right now. And yeah, I wouldn't want to endorse a product that I didn't actually like, and I do actually like these. I mean, they're legitimately good pants and shorts. I think they're more than legitimately worth the money, and that's not just me shelling out for the dollar sign. That's truly my belief.
I will say too, like, yeah, Lululemon does make dude clothes now, but do you really want to be wearing the same brand as your wife on the way in to do yoga? Probably not. So y'all go to birddogs.com, enter promo code CFB nerds, and they'll throw in a free Bird Dogs rope hat. That's birddogs.com, promo code CFB nerds, and boom, free Bird Dogs rope hat with your pair of Bird Dogs, the most comfortable shorts, pants, and sweatpants with built-in liners. You're not going to want to take these things off. I promise you. All right, Josh, we got 4 minutes and we're already 26 minutes late. We're going late tonight because Bama almost lost to Texas A&M and we had to talk about it. But Josh, let's talk on the end of this. Let's close it out with what you saw today. Was there anything? I feel like today was the first week this year that we didn't learn much of anything about anybody. And our top 10s were all kind of the same. Is that the feeling you got today? And then looking into next week, isn't it awesome that we're going to maybe get some new data that we haven't been able to get so far this year?
I think that's largely true. When I was looking at my top 10 and I looked at the top 25s and the scores, and honestly, what I ended up doing is I just said, okay, Ole Miss and Oklahoma State didn't impress me that much, and I kind of slid them down. Penn State, I feel like I've had them too low. I try to slide them up a little bit. USC, I still don't know what the heck they actually are. And everything else sort of stayed the same. Killtack9 made a comment, super chat. Thanks again. He's always a great supporter. That Jalen Milroe is a faster, bigger version of Blake Sims. I'm going to be honest. I don't know that that's true. I think Blake Sims threw the ball better than what Sims Alabama did out of Jalen Milroe. If Alabama was missing Bryce Young for the rest of the year, this would be a very different conversation. As it is, I kind of have to throw my hands up and shrug and say injured quarterback and then move on.
If Alabama had Blake Sims tonight, like recently retired Blake Sims tonight, they probably win that game by 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, and that's the kicker, right? Like if they lose the game, I would have had a reaction because you lose the game and that matters. The L matters. But in a game where you outgain the other team 288-70 on the ground with a backup quarterback, I mean, it's tough. It's tough to ding too much. I'm not impressed by him, but I can't be that unimpressed either. And I'm gonna end on this, so just to take away your steam and make you blush a little bit, with David Salinas's super chat, where he said Daniel looked flying AF on Pate's show. More collabs, please. Lots of love from the Aggie faithful, despite the warranted and fair hate. So first off, again, congratulations again on your appearance. You did a great job. But I think that response from Texas A&M is a little telling, right? That Texas A&M fans are very, very excited that they fought in that game, but they also know what their team is and what their limitations are. And I feel like all we saw were those same things we knew that worked out in a way that kept them close in a game where Alabama turned it over a lot, but didn't really give me a lot of new data for how I want to look at Alabama even next week against Tennessee.
Yeah, and I'm going to drop a little nugget we've actually got a pretty large crowd on right now as we end this. Thank you to Ace Man. I was talking to Pate after we did that live show. We talked for about an hour after, just about industry stuff and how we do these shows and how we're so different. And Josh, we struggle sometimes with being negative, or it seems negative, because we're just honest and we're not chasing numbers. We're not trying to flatter people. We're nerds by nature, so we kind of pick at the things that you're bad at. And I said, Pate, I don't know how to deal with it sometimes, where like it's tough because we're right a lot and it doesn't feel good. Like, and it costs us a following from people who would genuinely, if they stuck with us, would realize that we're earnest and we're honest about what we say in our observations. Sometimes we're wrong, but sometimes, like I told Pate, I was like, he said, what's the worst thing? And he said, this is why I try not to be negative early in the season or in the off season. He said, what if you come out in June and say Florida State's going to suck this year, and they suck, and you're right? Well, that fan has hated you for 6 months, and now you're right, and they still hate you. So one of the things he said that I think is something I really feel with A&M fans, because we've been big supporters of them when they've been treated unfairly, but we've also been very honest with them. One of the things he says he likes to do is, like, when he's right, he genuinely will get in engagements with fans and say, I hate that this is the case. I hate that I'm right on this. I don't want to be right on this. And that's how I am with A&M, is that I don't want to be right on A&M, just like I don't want to be right on Auburn every year with their offensive struggles. But I think we're to the point where, as this comment shows, even A&M fans get it. And I hope that the ones that stick with us understand that when we're pointing these things out, it's because we, one, think you should demand to be better, and two, we actually want you to be better.
And I think that's the truth of it. Is for years it was kind of funny that we were viewed as almost Texas A&M stands, because we felt like they were a good football team that wasn't really appreciated for what they were, which was a team that wasn't as good as Alabama and LSU when they were kind of powers, or whoever the second best power was in the West, and then maybe they'd lose to Georgia or somebody in the East. And it's like, yeah, they did that. They lost to Clemson out of conference. They lost 3 or 4 games. They're still going to beat 100 teams out of the country, 115 teams out of the country on a very consistent basis. And to see this sort of slow regression is kind of painful. And this gets into a topic that I've talked about a lot, and I feel like people don't track these things very well because they're so slow. It's such a long burn, slow play thing. These contracts that have been handed out to these coaches are going to cause some problems. The combined buyout for Brian Kelly, Jimbo Fisher, and I want to say it was Marcus Freeman. And I'm going to look at my sheet now, because I want to make sure I'm not saying this right.
If Marcus Freeman has a monster buyout, that's insane, because he's never been a head coach. So that
he probably does. I think his contract's around $90 million, but I remember now I looked at, and it probably is monster, but because they're private, they don't disclose it. The 3 I'm thinking of, and it's actually worse than that. Mel Tucker's buyout. Mel Tucker, Michigan State, his buyout is $95 million. It's guaranteed on his contract. Jimbo Fisher's is about $85 million, and Brian Kelly's is about $85 million. To fire those 3 coaches would cost about $270 million, that's the amount of money that Kansas is currently dumping into their program to try to build all new facilities for the entire football team, like an all new athletic department facility and everything else. Almost $300 million. And Texas A&M has the money that they can pay that, but I don't think people quite appreciate what it's going to do to some of these programs when they have to move on, because the money's going to get tight in this constant bidding war. And we already saw it happen to Auburn. Auburn didn't hire Brian Harsin because he was their absolute number 1 favorite pick for head coach. They hired Brian Harsin because the prior president at Auburn, Heath, signed a $27 million and a huge contract extension at the end of 2017 with Gus Malzahn. They gave him like a $40 million buyout. And when they fired Gus Malzahn, they had to pay him $27 million, which they didn't really have. And then after you pay him $27 million, then you then have to turn around and pay several million to buy out somebody else, and then pay several more million for his salary. And as much money as these schools have and the boosters have, it's sometimes a hard sell. Now, part of it was they weren't all on the same page, but that was $27 million. These are 3 times, 4 times that number. And I know they've got more resources, but even A&M and certainly Michigan State at $95 million, Michigan State's going to have a hard time eating $100 million to pay out the coach, to then start over and have to pay somebody else that much more money. A lot of these programs are, I think, in a much more precarious situation long-term than anybody really wants to admit.
And what's crazy, coaches get these monster buyout clauses and huge contracts, very little leverage. Same thing with Ed Orgeron, Brian Harsin. Like, these never end well for the school. That's what's crazy to me. Like, if Jimbo Fisher is good enough to win a national championship at Texas A&M, he's not leaving there. So you don't have to pay him $90 million. Let him at least win a division before you give him that kind of money. He's never even won a division. So I think that's a little bit insane. We got to go to bed, y'all. It's super late for us. And like, we got to get up tomorrow and get some of this cut up and then record some more previews for y'all, because you're going to want to consume more content from us. So remember, like, subscribe, like this video too. It does help us a lot. And again, we have a podcast version. If you want to hear this 2-hour discussion on podcast instead of watching the video, it is out there as well. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a wonderful week, and God bless.